Next, we have the principles of training. If you've ever worked out, you may have wondered, why are you doing what you're doing? Anything you've done in the weight room and the cardio floor is based on principles of training. And these principles that I'm about to discuss will make a lot of sense on why you do what you do. I'm going to start out first with the Fitt Principle, F-I-T-T. The Fitt Principle is based on 4 ways that you can alter the intensity of your exercise. Because we all know you need to make something harder. Well, how can you make something harder so that you can improve? If you're talking about running, you don't just run faster. You can also run more often. You could run several days a week, more versus just 1 day a week, or 5 days a week versus 3 days a week. I'm going to take the frequency, the intensity, the time, and the type, and break them down and be a little bit more specific and give you some examples how you can change those 4 things to affect the intensity of your exercise. Before I start, I want to remind you, when you are changing the intensity of your exercise, only change one thing at a time. Don't lower something and raise something else. Keep everything the same, but change only one thing. So the first thing we'll talk about is the frequency. Like I mentioned in my first explanation, frequency is how often, the number of times per week that an aerobic exercise is performed. Determining the frequency depends on your intensity, your time, and your type. The intensity is how hard you are doing this exercise. So in terms of running, that could be speed. In terms of the elliptical, you could be talking about the resistance level that you have that machine on. You could add a weight vest. So looking at the difference in heart rate classification, you're using a different percentage of your heart rate max. So from anywhere from very light, moderate, hard, very hard, and maximum. That wording and these heart rate ranges will be referred to during the rest of the chapter and in your exercise prescription for clients for the rest of your career. So buckle up. Intensity ranges, we will focus on this when we learn more about the different heart rates. You can also measure intensity by the RPEs, rates of perceived exertion, but heart rate is a much more exact and personal number to look at. Time is the third part of the Fitt Principle. The time refers to the number of minutes, not to be confused with frequency, which measured the number of days. So you can run 3 days a week for 30 minutes, and you want to increase your time. You'll add 5 minutes. Now on here, in your books, there is a table, guidelines of duration of aerobic exercise. This helps with the prescription of a new client that you have coming in. If they are completely deconditioned, you want to start them out with 5 to 10 minutes of aerobic exercise. 10 to 20 for a beginner, 15 to 45, 30 to 60 for high. Now, some of those may seem small. The deconditioned person is going to progress at a faster rate, but they need to start out in this smaller time range, because if you try and push them at someone of average or high fitness level, they may not be able to do it and become discouraged and drop out. Now, the type of exercise, there's a lot of information on this slide, but I wanted to include the table from your book. The type is the selection of exercises that you're doing, the type of activity. So you could change what you're doing to challenge your intensity, change it to something you're not used to doing. Regardless of the type of exercise you're doing, you want to make sure that you are involving large muscle groups, and most importantly, that the type of exercise involves your client's interests. All right, we have the principles of training. These 5 principles of training will give you the steps you need to take in writing out a prescription for cardiovascular exercise for your client. Overload, progression, specificity, adaptation, and reversibility. The first is overload. I like to explain overload as showing your body what's hard. And eventually, when it knows what hard is, it adapts to make that the norm. So thinking with that, let's talk overload is required. You have to challenge your body. If you don't challenge it, it can't improve, and in some cases will even detrain itself. So continuing to use your 5-pound weights Monday, Wednesday, Friday for 7 years, you are less strong than you were when you started 5 years ago with the 5-pound weights. Giving this a cardiovascular definition, your lungs, your heart and your lungs are detraining themselves if you continue to walk at the same pace without hills. Hills are going to be harder for you 5 years of doing that than they were 3 years into your training. So overload principle is where we apply the Fitt principle, the frequency, intensity, time, and type. That is how we alter our program to put the stress on the system that we are training. Now, to maximize the overload of the aerobic training, you want to make sure you follow the following rules. Exercise should be the correct type. It should be done at the proper intensity, should be of sufficient duration. Exercise should occur with adequate frequency. And the goal is to increase the heart rate and the respiration to a place of an appropriate physiological stress. What's the point in doing it if you're not going to benefit from it? And not following these rules will not lead to the success that you're looking for. All right, the next is progression. Progression is overload principle in motion. You progress from one stage of overload to the next. Once you've mastered running for 30 minutes at 6 miles per hour, then you want to master running 30 minutes at 6.5 miles per hour. So you challenge yourself, you progress to the next stage of conditioning. Now there's 3 stages of conditioning we would like to talk about during progression. You want to start out with the initial conditioning stage. So you have a new client, and the first 4 to 6 weeks are your initial conditioning stage. You're taking a person that is coming from their sofa to you. They will initially condition themselves with low-level aerobic activity, 10 to 20 minutes, because they aren't conditioned. Eventually, you will be able to increase the time to 45 minutes in a few weeks. Remember, the less in shape someone is, the more improvement they have to make, so their rate will seem faster than someone that is already at a higher level. And in terms of the intensity that you're looking at in this initial stage, can be anywhere from 40 to 85%. 85% more towards the end of this stage, but start with something 40, with around 40%, and give them something to improve upon. Now the second stage of progression is the improvement conditioning stage. In the initial conditioning stage, you build a fitness base. Now we're going to make it better. So this stage is where you really are focusing on the aerobic conditioning of the individual. We're talking 8 to 20 weeks. Pretty much a good chunk of their year is built on training for something. If you train for a marathon, you're looking at 16 to 20 weeks of preparation for that. But you don't start training for a marathon without ever having run. So you need that initial stage to get you to where you can actually train for something. You've got a base. We're going to work from 60 to 90% of our heart rate max. And your rate of progression within this stage is every 2 to 3 weeks taking on a new challenge, whether it's a greater intensity, a different heart rate range, say 65%, and you jump it up to 70%, or distance. Remember, we have the Fitt Principle we want to apply. Now, the third stage is your maintenance stage. You've reached this echelon of aerobic training. Now what do you do with it? Well, you don't just stop, usually because you're addicted to fitness now. But in the maintenance stage, you want to maintain that level of fitness, not lose it. You don't want to keep increasing because you can only go so far till your body will tell you it can't do anymore. So we want to maintain, and that's when you start mixing up the activities, making sure you're not set in one plane of motion. Make sure you're not just doing one type of exercise. You start working on all of those components of physical fitness in addition to just your cardiovascular training. You can find activities that accentuate what your favorite is. So remember the 3 stages of progression. Now, the last 3 principles of training, specificity, adaptation, and reversibility, they are just as important as the first 2, but they don't require as much explanation. Adaptation is just implying that our bodies as humans, we respond to a load by getting better. When we lift a weight and it's hard for us, our body responds, our muscles respond by repairing themselves and making them stronger, so the next time we ask it to do it, it's prepared. Now that doesn't happen overnight, but when that does happen, it will happen at a different time for each of us, and that's what makes us all different. However, some level of adaptation needs to occur. Specificity is one of the easiest, hardest things to learn when it comes to training, because you will see people training for something that is not going to actually give them the result they're looking for. Specificity, the principle of specificity means train for what you are trying to accomplish. You're not going to train for a marathon by powerlifting. And you're not going to train for a strongman competition by swimming in a pool. So change it, think about that, what you're actually trying to accomplish. Does that mean you completely ignore one part of fitness? No. But that means what you need to focus on in that training relates to the goal at hand. And reversibility is one of my favorites because you cannot store up fitness. Your body is not a bank of fitness. You don't just train for 3 days a week and take 4 off. You don't just train for 3 weeks and take 2 weeks off. Your body needs to constantly be reminded of what you want it to do. Because our body has a set way that it likes to be. And when we train it, when we make it lift a certain weight, when we make it run a certain way, it gets used to that. But then if we don't remind it that it needs to keep doing that, it will go back to doing as little as possible. Next, I will talk about monitoring intensity. Do you need me to stop?